Hey guys, it's Courtney. Today I'm going to be making another card using the My Monthly Hero November 2019 card kit. Today I'm going to be using some of the dies. So I went ahead and cut down this panel here that is the door, I guess, like the front of a house. And some of these areas pop out and others are kind of just embossed or cut through slightly just so that you can kind of differentiate between what's what. The door also opens. So after you run this through your die cutting machine, you want to kind of slowly bend this back because depending on what cardstock you're using, I'm using Neenah 80 pound. It's not too thick where there's not enough stability, I should say. So you just want to be careful when you're kind of opening and closing that door until you get a really nice crease there. I also cut out the wreath and two of these little planters that will go in front of my house on either side of the door. So first I'm going to take another piece of Neenah Solar White cut down to an A2 size card, and I'm just taking light pencil lines and I'm tracing the inside of the door and the window above, as well as the little lights on either side of the door, just the openings there. And we'll get to that later, but first we are going to color up this panel. So now that we zoomed in, you can kind of see all of the detail that is in this die. So I'm going to start off with my W1, which is the lightest warm gray marker that I have. And I'm pretty much covering the entire thing. And I'm not really worried about getting any kind of shading. I'm going to do my shading directly over this. And because it's such a light color, I'm not worried about coloring over anything else because I can easily cover it up with the colors that I do plan on using for the rest of everything. So now we're going to color the individual bricks. I'm going to bring in two more warm gray colors here, and I'm going to use my W5 for my shading and my W3 for my highlight. I'm only using two colors here. Now for the bricks on the right hand side, I'm doing my shading to the right hand side. So I'm putting a line on the bottom portion of the brick and on the right side of the brick. Then I'll blend that out with the W3. Now on the left side, I'm just going to do the opposite. I'm going to add a little bit of shading to the bottom of the brick and off to the left hand side of the brick. And now the paper is already saturated, so you're probably going to get a really good blend here, being we've already put down that layer of the W1. So I went ahead and colored all of these bricks, and it really didn't take as long as it probably looks like it took. Maybe about 5 minutes or so. So once all of those were done, we are going to color in the door frame. And I'm going to stick with the W markers, the warm gray markers. And you'll see as I'm doing my coloring, I'm kind of moving pieces around. Because these pieces aren't necessarily embossed as much as they're cut, I can kind of maneuver them to make sure that I get in between all of the little edges. So I'm going to start off with my darkest warm gray marker, which is the W7, and I'm just going to do a little bit of shading on the left-hand side of the left-hand side of the frame and the right-hand side for the right-hand side of the frame. So basically the same thing as I did with the bricks as far as the shading goes. Again, I'm going directly in with my darkest color. Not only is the paper already saturated, but gray markers tend to blend a lot easier than most other color combinations, so I don't have a problem going directly in with my darkest color first. So I'm going to go in with that W5 here, and I'm going to extend this out pretty far. I'm using a 3-color combination, and whatever your mid-tone is, whether you're using one of them, two of them, three of them, however many markers you're using, your mid-tones are going to be the ones that you use the most of. Your dark color and your light color are going to be used the most sparingly. So I'm just extending these areas out, like I said, pretty far. Some of these areas are pretty tiny anyway. And then I'm going to finish off with the W3, and I'm just going to get these areas to blend a little bit. Again, this is a fairly light color. I know I plan on coloring my door red and pretty dark red. So if I go over the door a little bit with this W3, I'm not overly concerned because I can color directly over it. And like I said, you can kind of see how I'm opening and closing the door and kind of putting my fingers behind the panel to kind of push the little pieces up just to make sure I'm getting all of the areas. It's hard to tell when you're working on a scrap piece of paper because you're actually scribbling on that scrap piece of paper. So sometimes you feel like you're coloring and everything, but you may miss a spot. So I did go beyond that little area off to the right and left, and I just took my white gel pen just to add a few little dots there, and you'll never know the difference. Even though our background is with the W1, you're really not going to be able to tell. So for these little lights on either side here, I'm just using two colors because I don't want to go down to the W3. It's going to blend in with the bricks too much. I'm adding quite a bit of the W7 because I want these to appear as if they're really, really dark. So I'm only just adding a little bit of a highlight with the W5, and I'm just adding a little bit of shading where in the center and off on either side. Because so these are like kind of like a corner right in the center. So that would create a shadow. And then of course there would be a shadow on either side because I guess we're kind of pretty much sticking to a center light source here. Doing the same thing for this other little light fixture off on the other side. And then for the window frame above the door, I'm going to use the same color combination. I'm just going to add a little bit of shading to the bottom portion of it and kind of flick my color up in between each little section of this window, and then I'll blend that out with the W5. Again, just using two different colors here. And then we're going to move on to the greenery and the bows above this little window here. Now, I don't know whether you guys can see on camera. I think you can. Within this part of the image here, there's little cut lines where different leaves would be. So I'm going to go in with my darkest green, and I'm just going to pretty much fill in those little areas or those individual leaves. And then I'm going to go in with my lightest green. I'm only using two different greens here, and I'm just going to fill in the entire thing. And these greens are pretty close together where I can go in with my darkest color first, but there is enough difference where you're going to kind of see a little bit of dimension within this little, I don't know, greenery thing. Now, once that's done, we're going to go ahead and color the bows. And I'm going to use the same red combination that I pretty much always use, and I'm going to be using throughout the entire card. Now, for the bows and for any reds, keep in mind that reds tend to bleed. Reds tend to end up in places that you don't want them to be. So for teeny tiny areas like this, I like to go directly in with my darkest color first because I don't want to oversaturate the paper and risk my colors bleeding. Once they bleed, it's done. There's no getting it completely up. It's always going to be seen. So I went in right with my darkest color and just added the darkest areas where these bows are kind of bunched up in the center. For the bows, I'm only using a 3-color combination, but you'll see for the rest of the card, I'm going to be using a 4-color combination. I just didn't want to add too much color to these bows. Now for the door, I'm going to use the same red combination, but I'm going to add in a R24, which is going to be my lightest mid-tone. So because this is a large area, I am going to go directly in with my lightest color first. I'm going to add a little bit of shading to these, I don't know what they're called, but they're little sections within the door. On the right-hand side, the shading is going to be to the right-hand side. On the left-hand side, the shading is going to be to the left-hand side. So once I have that mapped out, I'm going to go right in with that R89 and pretty much just go over those areas that I've already mapped out. I'm also going to add some shading where the door opens. So I guess like where the hinges would be, that would pretty much be the darkest area. So now you have to be very careful with your reds, especially being there's no black lines. There's no black outline of these images to kind of guide you. So it's very easy to go out of the lines. So this is where you have to kind of twist and turn your paper and kind of move it around a little bit just to make sure that you're getting into all of the edges that you need to. Next, moving on to the R46, I'm going to extend these areas out in the center of the door a little bit and then also extend this area out where the door opens. And then I'm going to move on to the R24, which is the lightest mid-tone, I guess you could say. But I'm pretty much covering up the entire door, including these little areas in the center. So this will be my lightest color for the inside of these little rectangles or sections or whatever you want to call them, as well as the rest of the door. But the little frames, I guess you could call it, around these little sections, I'm going to leave white for now. This is actually going to be the only area that I add that highlight color, which is that R22. So I'm going to fill in the rest of the door, and just be careful you don't go out of the lines, but also you may have to go over certain areas more than once to get rid of those streaky lines that you sometimes get with the alcohol markers. You can see I opened my little door and I'm going around the edges first. I just found that to be a little bit easier. That way it kind of gave me a guide as to how far I need to go out with my color. So once all of those areas were filled in, I'm going to bring in that R22 just for the outside of these little sections. Now, once you fill these in, you may realize that you didn't get close enough with that R24 or whatever color you're using in place of it. So I did go back in with that R24 just to kind of make these a little bit more straight because I didn't do that great of a job. So once that was done, we are going to go ahead and color these little pieces, I guess, the wreath and these little planters here. And I pretty much did the same thing for both of them. For the wreath, again, these have those little individual leaves that are kind of die cut halfway through anyway. And I'm going to go in with my darkest color with those and then fill in the rest with my lightest color, being careful to kind of go around that little bow. And again, I'm working on a scrap piece of paper. So once you do most of your coloring, you may have to pick it up and add a little bit of color around the edges just so that you don't have that white edge once you place this down onto your card. Going to color this bow the same way as I did for the bows on the house. And for these little planters, I'm going to use the same green combination. However, I'm also going to add a YG99. And I'm just adding some random flicks just to get a little bit more contrast and a little bit more texture, I guess you could say. And for the, would it be a stem or, I don't know. I don't know what this would be, but the middle part. I'm going to just color this in solid with the E57 and then use some E20s for the planter part itself, just concentrating my shading being on either side so that I keep a center highlight and it looks to be a round object. So once all of my coloring was done for all of my die cut pieces anyway, I'm going to kind of arrange everything just to make sure everything looks good and I didn't miss any areas, especially like I said, I don't have any of these black outlines. Now there's a little doormat that's in front of the door and it's kind of a die cut and you can color it as is. But there's also a stamp within the stamp set from the kit that is that mat. So I am going to go ahead and stamp that just to kind of give a little bit of interest, I guess you could say. And I'm just going to use my acrylic block. You can certainly use a stamp positioner if you're not confident with lining things up. I'm going to stamp this with some blackout ink by Ink on 3. And then there's also 2 words within the stamp set that will fit directly into this doormat. I'm going to use the welcome word, and I think the other one is hello. So you can fit either one. They perfectly match the doormat. I am going to do a little bit of coloring to this as well. I'm going to bring out some more greens, and just an FYI, once I get to the Christmas tree, which will be in just a few minutes, I use the same green combination for that. So I'm just doing a little bit of shading on either side and also adding a little bit more shadowing to the back portion of the doormat. The further back it gets, the darker it will appear. So once all of that coloring was done, I'm going to go ahead and put this aside and we're going to work on the inside of our little house. So here is our panel with our pencil lines. And first I am going to go ahead and do my stamping. So I'm going to stamp out this little cat first, and then I want to create a mask for her. So I'm just going to use some full stick Post-it notes. I'm not doing any ink blending, and I'm not doing a whole ton of stamping. So your mask does not have to be absolutely perfect when you're only doing a little bit of stamping. Don't take too much time on your masks. Don't waste your time. So I'm going to go ahead and mask her out, and then I wanted to place my Christmas tree and a few presents. And honestly, didn't want to cut out any more masks, so yes, I did. I dug through the garbage and pulled out my masks that I used for yesterday's card for these little presents. So I'm going to go ahead and stamp out the first one, which will be in front of the other. So I'll stamp that first, mask that out, stamp my other little present here, and also mask that out because that will be in front of the Christmas tree. Going to finish off with the Christmas tree itself and stamp that directly behind these little presents. Next, I am going to erase the pencil lines from the window and the little lights, but I'm not totally erasing it. You guys probably can't see it on camera. I'm erasing it enough where you're not going to see it, but enough where I can still see it. So I know where to add my color. I want to make it look like the lights are on inside the house, so I'm just adding a few yellows. And I'm just adding a little bit more shading to the bottom portion. And honestly, there's no reasoning for this. I just wanted a little bit of variation in color. And I'm just going to use 3 different yellows here. I did bring back out my little house just to make sure that this lines up, and I didn't need to add any more color. Now for my little scene on the inside of the door, I obviously want this to appear as if it's the inside of the house. So that means I have to separate the wall and the door. So this will also guide me because obviously I have to erase my pencil lines. I'm just going to take a straight edge and an EK Success journaling pen, and I'm going to draw 2 straight lines where my floor and my wall meet, and I'm just going slightly past where my pencil lines are. Then I can feel confident enough to erase those pencil lines and know where I need to do my coloring. Now, I'm not going to show you the coloring because I pretty much colored the same way as I did for the whole entire scene that was posted yesterday. So I will link that video below in case you missed that and you actually wanted to see the coloring. So you can see that everything lined up perfectly. And next we're going to put everything together. So I have my white A2 size top folding note card here. I am first going to take my Tombow Mono multi glue and adhere this house panel, I guess, down to my scene, my little scene. And I'm putting glue everywhere except for the door itself. But you do want to make sure that you're putting glue everywhere other than the door. Then I'm going to adhere this entire panel onto my card base. And obviously I don't have a sentiment other than the welcome on the front. So I'm going to take one of the sentiments from the stamp set from the kit, and I'm using some VersaFine Onyx Black ink, and I'm just going to stamp that in the inside of my card. Next, I am going to go ahead and finish off, or at least partially finish off, with this glitter lacquer that comes in the kit. Now, honestly, I'll be honest, I have no idea what this is. I don't know what you're supposed to use it for or how you're supposed to use it, but it's glittery and it kind of looks like snow. So I added it to either side of my little doormat there, and it did take a little bit of time to dry. And for the life of me, I could not find my palette knife. So when all else fails, use your fingers to spread this out. My fingers are already inky and already smudgy, so why not use my fingers? So once that did dry a little bit, I went ahead and used some foam tape to go ahead and pop up my little wreath, as well as these 2 little plants on either side of my door. And that is it. That is the card for today, guys. Thank you guys so much for stopping by. I will leave all of the supplies listed in the description box below. Have a great day. Bye.